Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in 2 Kings chapter 6 verse 1 through chapter 7 verse 20. Some of the prophets said to Elisha, "Look, the place where we meet with you is too cramped for us. Let's go to the Jordan. Each of us will get a log from there, and we will build a meeting place for ourselves there." He said, "Go." One of them said, "Please come along with your servants." He replied, "All right, I'll come." So he went with them. When they arrived at the Jordan, they started cutting down trees. As one of them was felling a log, the axe head dropped into the water. He shouted, "Oh no, my master, it was borrowed." The prophet asked, "Where did it drop in?" When he showed him the spot, Elisha cut off a branch, threw it in at the spot, and made the axe head float. He said, "Lift it out." So he reached out his hand and grabbed it. Now the king of Syria was at war with Israel. He consulted his advisers, who said, "Invade at such and such a place." But the prophet sent this message to the king of Israel: "Make sure you don't pass through this place, because Syria is invading there." So the king of Israel sent a message to the place the prophet had pointed out, warning it to be on its guard. This happened on several occasions. This made the king of Syria upset, so he summoned his advisers and said to them, "One of us must be helping the king of Israel." One of his advisers said, "No, my master, O king, the prophet Elisha, who lives in Israel, keeps telling the king of Israel the things you say in your bedroom." The king ordered, "Go find out where he is, so I can send some men to capture him." The king was told, "He is in Dothan." So he sent horses and chariots there, along with a good-sized army. They arrived during the night and surrounded the city. The prophet's attendants got up early in the morning. When he went outside, there was an army surrounding the city, along with horses and chariots. He said to Elisha, "Oh no, my master, what will we do?" He replied, "Don't be afraid, for our side outnumbers them." Then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, open his eyes so he can see." The Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw that the hill was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. As they approached him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, "Strike these people with blindness." The Lord struck them with blindness, as Elisha requested. Then Elisha said to them, "This is not the right road or city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for." He led them to Samaria. When they had entered Samaria, Elisha said, "O Lord, open their eyes so they can see." The Lord opened their eyes, and they saw that they were in the middle of Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, "Should I strike them down, my master?" He replied, "Do not strike them down. You did not capture them with your sword or your bow, so what gives you the right to strike them down? Give them some food and water so they can eat and drink, and then go back to their master." So he threw a big banquet for them, and they ate and drank. Then he sent them back to their master. After that, no Syrian raiding parties again invaded the land of Israel. Later, King Ben-Hadad of Syria assembled his entire army and attacked and besieged Samaria. Samaria's food supply ran out. They laid siege to it so long that a donkey's head was selling for 80 shekels of silver, and a quarter of a cab of dove's droppings for 5 shekels of silver. While the king of Israel was passing by on the city wall, a woman shouted to him, "Help us, my master, O king." He replied, "No, let the Lord help you. How can I help you? The threshing floor and winepress are empty." Then the king asked her, "What's your problem?" She answered, "This woman said to me, 'Hand over your son. We'll eat him today and then eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. Then I said to her the next day, 'Hand over your son and we'll eat him.' But she hid her son." When the king heard what the woman said, he tore his clothes. As he was passing by the wall, the people could see he was wearing sackcloth under his clothes. Then he said, "May God judge me severely if Elisha son of Shaphat still has his head by the end of the day." Now Elisha was sitting in his house with the community leaders. The king sent a messenger on ahead, but before he arrived, Elisha said to the leaders, "Do you realize this assassin intends to cut off my head? Look, when the messengers arrive, shut the door and lean against it. His master will certainly be right behind him." He was talking to them when the messenger approached and said, "Look, the Lord is responsible for this disaster. Why should I continue to wait for the Lord for help?" So Elisha replied, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of finely milled flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. An officer who was the king's right-hand man responded to the prophet, Look, even if the Lord made it rain by opening holes in the sky, could this happen so soon? Elisha said, Look, you will see it happen with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of the food. Now 4 men with a skin disease were sitting at the entrance of the city gate. They said to one another, Why are we just sitting here waiting to die? If we go into the city, we'll die of starvation, and if we stay here, we'll die. So come on, let's defect to the Syrian camp. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, well, we were going to die anyway. So they started down toward the Syrian camp at dusk. When they reached the edge of the Syrian camp, there was no one there. The Lord had caused the Syrian camp to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a large army. Then they said to one another, Look, the king of Israel has paid the kings of the Hittites and Egypt to attack us. So they got up and fled at dusk, leaving behind their tents, horses, and donkeys. They left the camp, as it was, and ran for their lives. When the men with the skin disease reached the edge of the camp, they entered a tent and had a meal. They also took some silver, gold, and clothes and went and hid it all. Then they went back and entered another tent. They looted it and went and hid what they had taken. Then they said to one another, It's not right what we're doing. This is a day to celebrate, but we haven't told anyone. If we wait until dawn, we'll be punished. So come on, let's go and inform the royal palace. So they went and called out to the gatekeepers of the city. They told them, We entered the Syrian camp and there was no one there. We didn't even hear a man's voice. But the horses and donkeys are still tied up, and the tents remain up. The gatekeepers relayed the news to the royal palace. The king got up in the night and said to his advisers, I will tell you what the Syrians have done to us. They know we are starving, so they left the camp and hid in the field, thinking, When they come out of the city, we will capture them alive and enter the city. One of his advisers replied, Pick some men and have them take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Even if they are killed, their fate will be no different than that of all the Israelite people. We're all going to die. Let's send them out so we can know for sure what's going on. So they picked 2 horsemen, and the king sent them out to track the Syrian army. He ordered them, Go and find out what's going on. So they tracked them as far as the Jordan. The road was filled with clothes and equipment that the Assyrians had discarded in their haste. The scouts went back and told the king. Then the people went out and looted the Syrian camp. A seah of finely milled flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel, just as the Lord had said they would. Now the king had placed the officer who was his right-hand man at the city gate. When the people rushed out, they trampled him to death in the gate. This fulfilled the prophet's word which he had spoken when the king tried to arrest him. The prophet told the king, 2 seahs of barley will sell for a shekel, and a seah of finely milled flour for a shekel. This will happen about this time tomorrow in the gate of Samaria. But the officer replied to the prophet, Look, even if the Lord made it rain by opening holes in the sky, could this happen so soon? Elisha said, Look, you will see it happen with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of the food. This is exactly what happened to him. The people trampled him to death in the city gate. Yeah, so more of the miraculous here. You have Elisha and his exploits being in the same vein as Elijah here, but perhaps even more so. You have this first instance here where they want to build a meeting place for the prophets because they had grown to be too large of a company. So they wanted to make a meeting place along the Jordan River. But as they were felling trees for this project, one of the prophet's axe heads flies off into the water, and he's distressed because it was borrowed. But Elisha cuts a branch, throws it in the spot, and the axe head floats. And he retrieves it. So, certainly a miraculous instance there. God having control of the density of objects. Now, then you have the king of Syria, who keeps making plans to raid Israel in certain places, but Elisha forewarns that these places are going to be raided, and so the king of Syria is repelled. And he figures that it's because there's an informant in the middle of his company, in his secret group of advisors, but they tell him that it's because of the prophet here. So they go and besiege the prophet with a huge army and soldiers. And Elisha's servants are freaking out, saying, "What will we do?" But Elisha prays that the eyes of the servant be opened. And it's shown to him that there's more on the side of Elisha than there are against him. These fiery chariots and horses surrounding Elisha, which I think we as Christians should be more cognizant of, that it isn't flesh and blood that we fight against, but against angels and principalities and powers and forces of darkness and heavenly places type thing. And if God is with us, who can be against us? And then this spiritual army strikes the material army blind, and Elisha leads them into the gates of the capital city, that is Samaria, and they're surrounded by the king of Israel's army in the heart of his capital. So when the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, should I strike them down, my master? And he says no, but feed them and send them away. And so there were no more raiding parties that invaded the land of Israel from Syria. But that didn't stop large frontal assaults, like this one that King Ben-Hadad organizes against Israel. And note well that I think this is the same Ben-Hadad that was messing with the king of Israel's father, Ahab. He besieges Samaria to such an extent that everybody in the city is starving, so much so that they've resorted to cannibalism for keeping themselves alive. The king of Israel thinks essentially that why should he wait on the Lord? Because it's the Lord who's punishing him here. And I like the response of Elisha. Do you realize this assassin intends to cut off my head? Look, when the messenger arrives, shut the door and lean against it. His master will certainly be right behind him. And so Elisha, in the audience of the king, says that the siege will be lifted, and not only that, flour will be sold cheaply at this time tomorrow. You have the officer of the gate, well, the king's right-hand man, saying, no way that's going to happen. Even if God himself opens up the sky and makes it rain bread, it's not going to happen. And he therefore doesn't get to eat any of it because of his lack of belief. And then you have these lepers who wander outside of the camp, saying to themselves that it's better for them to defect to the Syrians than either of the other options that are available to them, because then at least they'll live. So they go and see the camp, and it's deserted. And you see that all the Syrians left because they heard the sound of an army approaching. And it was, as the prophet said, that the flour was sold cheaply as a result of this. Okay, let's see what Guzik has to say here. The place where we dwell with you is too small for us. This indicates that at this time, Elisha had a significant impact on the nation. The old facility for housing the sons of the prophets was not large enough to meet the needs of all those who wanted to be trained in ministry. Please consent to go with your servants. Elisha did not initiate or lead this work of building a new center for training the prophets, but it could not happen without his approval and blessing. The iron axe head fell into the water. This was a significant loss. Iron was certainly present at this time in Israel, but it was not common enough to be cheap. Alas, master, for it was borrowed. The man who lost the axe head was rightly sensitive to the fact that he lost something that belonged to someone else, making the loss more acute. The iron axe head had been asked for, that is, begged or prayed for, and not necessarily borrowed from wise men. Interesting. So he cut off a stick and threw it in there, and he made the iron float. This was an obvious and unique miracle. There was no trickery in the way that Elisha put the stick in the water. It was simply an expression of his faith that God honored. God can do all things. He can make iron swim. We cannot, and yet you see the prophet did it, and he did it by the use of a stick. He cut down a stick. Was there any connection between the stick and the iron? I can't see any, and yet God does use means, and he would have us use means, from Spurgeon. The chief value of the story lies in its revelation of the influence Elisha was exerting in the nation. The growth of the school of the prophets was most remarkable, from Morgan. Pick it up for yourself. Conceivably, God could have arranged a way for the axe head to appear right in the man's hand without any effort on his part, but this miracle worked in a familiar way. God did the part only he could do, but he left to man the part that he could do. Elisha then caused the submerged axe head to surface and instructed the pupil to retrieve the axe. Thus he would personally participate in the miracle. From Patterson on Austell. Yeah. I don't know. I think sometimes we have this view of God as being an invisible force, or maybe even just invisible, immaterial, and somehow less capable of intervening in his creation. But God, being omnipotent, can bend down into the water and lift up an axe head for people to pick up. And the man of God sent to the king of Israel. Elisha did not support the corrupt monarchs of Israel, but he knew that it was even worse for Israel to be conquered and subjugated under Syria. Therefore, he gave the king of Israel information from divinely inspired espionage. A more sensible king, Jehoram, now sits on the throne of Ahab, and the prophet of the Lord is no longer a dreaded antagonist, but the king's trusted counselor. Elijah was a fugitive constantly on the run from a wrathful king, but now Elisha is a welcome visitor in Jehoram's court. From Dildai. Will you not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? The king of Syria was naturally mystified by the way the king of Israel knew all of Syria's plans beforehand. He was convinced there was a traitor among them, until one servant revealed that Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, knew and revealed these things. Alas, my master, what shall we do? When Elisha's servant saw the horses and chariots and a great army surrounding their city, he was naturally afraid. He knew that there was little chance of escaping or surviving an attack from so many. Do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. This seemed unbelievable to Elisha's servant. He saw the horses, the chariots, and the great army surrounding them. He could not see anyone who was with Elisha and him. We also notice that Elisha gave his servant a reason to not fear. This was not empty hope or wishful thinking. It was a real reason for confidence, even if the servant could not see it. Yeah, and I was thinking previously regarding the King Jehoram and Elisha being a trusted counselor for the king. And I wondered why that is. Because previously you had Naaman being sent by the king of Syria to Israel, and the king of Syria requested that Naaman be healed. But the king of Israel was like, how am I going to heal him? I don't know how to heal a guy. But Elisha caught wind of this and said, send him to me, I'll heal him. And so that he knows that there's a prophet in Israel. Yeah, I imagine after this instance, Elisha has some notoriety in the king's court there. Oh, both kings' court. Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. Elisha did not pray that God would change anything in the situation. His only request was that his servant could actually see the reality of the situation. Yet Elisha also did not try to persuade the servant of the reality of those who are with us. The servant could not have this explained to him, nor could he be persuaded into it. He had to see it. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. God answered Elisha's prayer. When a person is blind to spiritual reality, only God can open his eyes. God may do it through the words someone speaks, but the work of spiritually opening eyes is spiritual work and belongs to God alone. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. When his eyes were opened, the servant saw the reality that he could not see before. He saw that there really were more with him and Elisha than those assembled against them. The previous lack of perception on the part of Elisha's servant did not make the reality of the spiritual army any less real. If there are 50 people who do not see something, it doesn't invalidate the perception of one who does see. Yeah, inasmuch as 50 blind men would invalidate the sight of one seeing man. Faith is never the imagining of unreal things. It is the grip of things which cannot be demonstrated in the senses, but which are real. The chariots of horses and fire were actually there, from Morgan. From Spurgeon, that you have not perceived spiritual things is true, but it is no proof that there are none to perceive. The whole case is like that of the Irishman who tried to upset evidence by non-evidence. 4 witnesses saw him commit a murder. He pleaded that he was not guilty and wished to establish his innocence by producing 40 persons who did not see him do it. Of what use would that have been? So, if 40 people declare that there is no power of the Holy Ghost going with the word, this only proves that the 40 people do not know what others do. Horses and chariots were the most sophisticated and mighty military instruments of the day, but the invisible army of God had literally more firepower than the horses and chariots of the Syrians. The spiritual army had chariots of fire all around Elisha. If our eyes were opened, we should see the angel hosts as an encircling fence of fire, but whether we see them or not, they are certainly there. From Meyer. Strike this people, I pray, with blindness. The Syrian soldiers could not see the spiritual army, so they did not hesitate to approach Elisha. But just as he previously prayed that God would give sight to his servant, he then asked God to strike this people with blindness. God answered this prayer, just as he previously answered the prayer to give perception to the servant. This shows us that God may grant sight or send blindness according to his wisdom and in response to the prayers of his people. Not with a total blindness that they could see nothing, for then they would not have followed him, but with a partial blindness that they could not distinctly discern the man they sought, which might be by some alteration made by God in their brain or in the air. From Poole. Follow me, and I will bring you to the man whom you seek. Here Elisha told a technical truth, but certainly intended to deceive. He did in fact bring them to the man they sought. When their eyes were opened, Elisha was there with them. However, he led them back to Samaria, the capital city of the kingdom of Israel, and an unfriendly place for a group of Syrian soldiers. Yes, Elisha's gentle deception demonstrated a principle. The blind are easily deceived. Those who are spiritually blind should appreciate that they can be easily deceived regarding spiritual things. You shall not kill them. Instead of killing these enemy soldiers, Elisha instead commanded the king of Israel to treat them with kindness and generosity. This practice of answering evil with good successfully changed the policy of freelance raiders from Syria. Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his army and went up and besieged Samaria. Though the kindness of Elisha and the king of Israel changed the heart of the Syrian raiders, it did not change the heart of the king of Syria. He launched a large, full-scale attack against his neighbor to the south. He used the common method of attack in those days against securely walled cities. He besieged Samaria. A siege was intended to surround a city, prevent all business and trade from entering or leaving the city, and to eventually starve the population into surrender. There was a great famine in Samaria. The siege strategy successfully starved Samaria. The famine was so bad that a donkey's head or dove droppings became so expensive that only the rich could afford them. Wiseman says that dove droppings is better translated as carob beans, and that 5 shekels of silver were more than a month's wage for a laborer. Yet Poole writes that dove's dung, though it be hotter than ordinary, might in other respects be fitter for nourishment than other, as being made of the best and purest grains and having some moisture in it. When Hannibal besieged Cassilin, 1 mouse was sold for 200 pence. Puddings made of dog's guts were dear bought at the siege of Scodra from Trapp. Give your son that we may eat him. This shows how terrible the famine was. Mothers were so hungry that they ate their own children. From Deuteronomy 28, it contains an extended section where God warned Israel about the curses that would come upon them if they rejected the covenant he made with them. Part of that chapter describes the horrors fulfilled in this chapter. They shall besiege you at all your gates until your high and fortified walls, in which you trust, come down throughout all your land. And they shall besiege you at all your gates throughout all your land, which the Lord your God has given you. You shall eat the fruit of your own body, the flesh of your sons and your daughters, whom the Lord your God has given you, in the siege and desperate straits in which your enemy shall distress you. These terrors came upon Israel because they disobeyed God, rejected him, and abandoned the covenant he made with them. The covenant that God made with Israel over the land of Israel wasn't just some null and void thing. The disobedience of it had real and serious consequences, which were prophesied concerning what would happen to them. God do so to me and more also. The king was deeply grieved and angry, but not with himself, with Israel, or with their sin. The king was angry against the prophet of God. Don't shoot the messenger, man. Surely this calamity is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? The king of Israel was honest enough to admit that his real anger was against the Lord. Hear the words of the Lord. Though the king of Israel blamed the Lord for the calamity that came upon Israel in Samaria, God still had a word for the king and the nation, and it was a good word. Tomorrow, about this time, God's promise through Elisha was that in 24 hours, the economic situation in Samaria would be completely reversed. Instead of scarcity, there would be such abundance that food prices would radically drop in the city. The gate was the marketplace, as well as the local court of justice, from Wiseman. By the standards of that time, the prices listed were not cheap, but they were nothing compared to the famine conditions associated with the siege. By the next day, conditions would so improve that good products would be available again, even though at a substantial price, from Patterson and Austell. Look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, could this thing be? The king's officer doubted the prophecy, and his doubt was based on several faulty premises. First, he doubted the power of God. If God willed it, he certainly could make windows in heaven and drop down food from the sky for the hungry, besieged city of Samaria. He did so in the Exodus. Second, he doubted the creativity of God. In the mind of the king's officer, the way food could come to the city was from above, because the city was surrounded by a hostile besieging army. He had no idea that God could bring provision in a completely unexpected way. How often faith breaks down in this way. It knows that God is, and that he can act, but it only sees one way and refuses to believe that such a way will be taken. The supply came without the opening of heaven's windows. From Morgan. Yeah, just because we don't see any other way that God could act in a given situation doesn't mean that that hems God in any way. He's free to act in whichever way he pleases. Third, he doubted the messenger of God. Though the promise was admittedly hard to believe, the king's officer could have and should have believed it because it came from a man with an established track record of reliability. All in all, the officer well illustrates the conduct of unbelief. Unbelief dares to question the truthfulness of God's promise itself. Unbelief says, this is a new thing and cannot be true. Unbelief says, this is a sudden thing and cannot be true. Unbelief says, there is no way to accomplish this thing. Unbelief says, there's only one way God can work. Unbelief says, even if God does something, it won't be enough. Yeah. I think we should have faith in God that he can work in whichever way that he chooses. And I pray that when the announcement of God's action comes, that we don't respond in unbelief. In fact, you shall see it with your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. Through Elisha, God pronounced a harsh judgment upon the king's doubting officer. He would see the word fulfilled, but not benefit from its fulfillment. Unbelievers do not really enjoy the things of this life. The mass of them find that wealth does not yield them satisfaction. Their outward riches cannot conceal their inner poverty. To many men, it is given to have all that heart can wish, and yet not to have what their heart does wish. They have everything except contentment. From Spurgeon. Yeah. And just musing over things that God has promised us. He's promised us salvation through his Son, Jesus Christ, that he goes to prepare a place for us and will go and take us to that place. Ultimately, we shouldn't respond to that promise of Jesus with unbelief, but faith that ultimately he will do what he says he will do. Now, there were 4 leprous men. These men stayed at the entrance of the gate because they were not welcome in the city. Their leprous condition made them outcasts and untouchables. If you were to take out of the scripture all the stories that have to do with poor, afflicted men and women, what a very small book the Bible would become. Especially if together with these stories you removed all the psalms of the sorrowful, all the promises for the distressed, and all the passages which belong to the children of grief. This book indeed, for the most part, is made up of the annals of the poor and despised. From Spurgeon. Unfounded Jewish traditions say that these 4 were actually Gehazi and his 3 sons. Gehazi was afflicted with leprosy because of his greed toward Naaman. Yeah. I mean, certainly the only parallels there are that these lepers were fairly greedy when they got into the tents. Why are we sitting here until we die? Their logic was perfect. They would soon die from the famine if they stayed by the city. If any food became available, they would certainly be the last to receive it. So they decided that their chances were better if they surrendered to the Syrians. Now you perceive that there are just 2 courses open to you. You can sit still, but then you know that you must perish, or you can go to Christ, and your fear is that you will perish then. Yet you can but die if you go to him, and he rejects you, whereas if you do not go to him, you must surely perish. From Spurgeon. When they had come to the outskirts of the Syrian camp, to their surprise, no one was there. This huge army surrounded the city of Samaria for many months, and the camp was the home and supply center for thousands of men. When the lepers came upon it that morning, they discovered an empty army camp, fully supplied, but empty of men. The words "to the outskirts of the Syrian camp" imply that they came not only to the edge of the camp, but that they walked around to the furthermost part of the Syrian camp, the part away from the city. They came to the camp as someone from afar would approach, not as someone from Syria. They figured that this was their best chance, coming as if they were not from the besieged city into least fortified positions of the camp. Interesting. They went around. This approach of the lepers to the camp may provide the occasion for the miracle itself. Perhaps the Lord had in some way magnified the stumbling footsteps of the men as they made their way around the camp's opposite end, from Patterson and Austell. For the Lord had caused the army of the Syrians to hear the noise of chariots, the noise of a great army. Israel was powerless against this besieging army, but God wasn't powerless. He attacked the Syrian army simply by causing them to hear the noise of an army. Perhaps God did this by putting the noise into the air. Perhaps he simply created the perception of the noise in the minds of the Syrian soldiers. However God did it, it happened. The same God who struck one Syrian army so they could not see what was there, now struck another Syrian army so that they heard things that were not there, and left the camp intact. Everything was left behind, leaving the unlikely lepers to spoil the camp. As a result, the siege for Samaria was over, even though no one in the city knew it or enjoyed it. Everyone who went to bed that night felt that he was still in that horrible den where grim death seemed actually present in the skeleton forms of the hunger-bitten. They were as free as the hearts of the wilderness had they known it, but their ignorance held them in vile imprisonment. From Spurgeon. Yeah. And I think sometimes we can be held captive by a prison guard that's no longer there, as is the case with sin and death. God has conquered sin and death through his Son, Jesus Christ. And he said to his apostles to go out and baptize, go out into all the nations, baptizing them into the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and to make disciples of all nations. It's right for us to proclaim this lifting of the siege against our soul, and to make people aware of this great salvation, that even though all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, that we can be made right with God, and that if we confess with our mouths that Jesus is Lord and believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, then we will be saved. They went into one tent and ate and drank. Of course they did. After the long period of famine, this was the answer to every hope and prayer they had. And he went and hid it. And they went and hid it. They knew that their discovery of the camp could not remain secret forever. They hid some of the valuables so they could profit by them even when the camp was discovered by others. We are not doing right. Come, let us go and tell. The lepers rightly enjoyed the miracle God provided, but they also realized the gift gave them a responsibility to share it with others. They understood that to remain silent and to selfishly enjoy their blessings would be sin. They had a responsibility to share the good news. If the only result of our religion is the comfort of our poor little souls, if the beginning and the end of piety is contained within oneself, why, it is a strange thing to be in connection with the unselfish Jesus and to be the fruit of his gracious Spirit. Surely Jesus did not come to save us that we might live unto ourselves. He came to save us from selfishness. From Spurgeon. Yet they enjoyed the feast first before they told others about it. We cannot properly share the good news of Jesus Christ unless we ourselves are enjoying it. Amen. They went and called to the gatekeepers of the city. Since the lepers were not welcome in the city, they could only communicate with the gatekeepers. There were many people they could not speak to, but they were faithful to speak to the ones they could speak to. And the gatekeepers called out, and they told it. The good news from the lepers was communicated in the simplest way possible. It went from one person to another, until the news reached the king himself. So let us send them and see. This was the sensible reaction to the good news that started with the report of the lepers. The report might be true, or it might not be, It only made sense to test it and see. Yeah. Then the people went out and plundered the tents of the Syrians. When the good news that started with a report of lepers was found to be true, there was no stopping the people, because they knew their need. They were happy to receive God's provision to meet that need. The king's officer derided the possibility of the prophet's prediction, and no doubt had plenty of adherents. But the leper's report swept away all his words to the winds. They had known, tasted, and handled from Mayor. According to the word of the Lord, through Elisha, God announced the exact prices in the Samaritan markets, and the prophecy was proven to be precisely true. The king had appointed the officer on whose hand he leaned to have charge of the gate. Perhaps the king did this to rebuke his officer. This man would have to personally supervise the people responding to the provision he said could never come, because he could not understand how God could bring the supply despite the siege. For the people trampled him in the gate, and he died. The prediction regarding the officer proved just as true as the prediction regarding the prices of food in the markets of Samaria. Because of his unbelief, he saw others enjoy God's blessing, but he did not. Yeah. It's interesting, too. The king of Samaria, king of Israel, showed more faith than the guard did, and he didn't put Elisha to death, even though he previously desired to. It would seem to me that he said, fine, let's see if this prophecy of the Lord comes true. And it did. So I think it's important that if God says that something's going to happen, that we believe in him. And that's especially true concerning the salvation of his son. Like John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. That is, we should believe Jesus, that anyone who believes on him won't perish but have everlasting life. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.